At exactly 6 o'clock on a cool Tuesday morning, I walked out my front door with a travel mug full of burnt coffee, expecting nothing more exciting than hauling a load of fence posts to the back pasture. Instead, I stopped dead halfway across the yard because my truck was trapped behind my own gate. A brand new silver padlock hung from my chain where mine should have been, and a 40-foot fifth-wheel RV sat sideways across my private access road like somebody had dropped an apartment building in the middle of my driveway. For a second, I honestly wondered if I was still waking up, because no reasonable person wakes up expecting strangers to lock them out of their own property. Then a man climbed down from the RV wearing mirrored sunglasses and the kind of grin that always shows up 5 minutes before trouble. "Morning," he said, stretching like he owned the sunrise. "Figured we'd secure the entrance while we're staying here." I looked at the lock, looked at my truck, sitting helplessly behind the gate, then back at him. "That's my gate." He shrugged like I had complained about the weather instead of a crime. "You'll live. You got 12 acres back there. Share the world a little." Before I could answer, his wife stepped outside holding her phone already recording. She didn't even try to hide it. She pointed the camera at my face and laughed. "Here we go. The neighborhood drama king is upset about some gravel." She wasn't filming because she wanted evidence. She was filming because she expected entertainment, because somewhere along the way they'd convinced themselves I was going to explode, scream, throw punches, become the villain they'd already described to everyone else on the road. Then she smiled straight into her camera and said the sentence that explained everything. "We've already told everybody around here you're impossible to deal with, so don't disappoint us." Funny thing about getting older, you stop worrying about winning arguments and start thinking about winning records. So instead of yelling, I quietly reached into my pocket, opened my own camera app, and recorded exactly what I was seeing. The unfamiliar padlock hanging from my chain. The RV blocking every inch of my recorded easement. Fresh hydraulic fluid dripping onto the gravel. One orange survey stake flattened beneath their stabilizer jack. Their license plate, today's date, the exact time. Nobody stopped smiling because nobody thought details mattered. They figured confidence was the same thing as ownership. It usually isn't. You see, when I bought that land almost 4 years earlier, I wasn't interested in trusting anybody's memory about where roads belonged. I paid for a title search, ordered certified copies of every easement on file, walked the entire property with a licensed surveyor, and stored digital copies of every map in 3 different places. Call me paranoid if you want. Growing up on a farm teaches you that paperwork weighs almost nothing until the day it outweighs an argument. Every morning after that, I repeated the same routine. Coffee, camera, gate. 11 mornings in a row. 11 videos. Same angle, same RB, same lock, same puddle growing a little wider beneath the trailer, same bent survey marker pressed farther into the dirt. I never touched their camper, never blocked them in, never threatened them. Every afternoon, the husband would wander over with another sarcastic comment. "Still making your little movie?" Sometimes he'd salute the camera. Sometimes he'd wave. Once he actually posed beside the lock with both thumbs up while his wife laughed so hard she nearly dropped her phone. They genuinely believed they were documenting my overreaction, when all they were really doing was confirming my timeline. Around day 5, I replaced my own broken chain after cutting off my original lock that they'd illegally trapped in place. I installed heavier hardware, mounted a bright reflective notice directly on the gate, and printed every word large enough to read from the driver's seat. Record Pirevit Aceman. Uaneho Racid O Prestruction, subject to Lely penalties. Tawa Forests, after 12 hours under county. By sunset, the husband left me a voicemail between fits of laughter. "You can't tow somebody's home. Genius. That's called a residence. Maybe ask your little county office before embarrassing yourself." I listened to it twice because overconfidence has a funny habit of becoming evidence all by itself. The truth was, I'd already spoken with the county. Not once, several times. I never asked what I wanted them to do. I asked what they needed from me. That difference matters. They told me exactly what standard documentation would support an obstruction complaint. Photographs, dated video, proof of ownership, proof of the recorded easement, written authorization for enforcement. No guessing, no assumptions, just procedure. So, while my new neighbors spent nearly 2 weeks performing for social media, I quietly assembled a file thick enough that nobody would have to take my word for anything. They were betting on emotion. I was collecting chronology. They were hoping I'd lose my temper. I was making sure I never needed to. By the evening of the 11th day, my folder contained every document I could possibly need. every recording properly organized, every timestamp matching every photograph. And as I closed the file, I remember thinking that justice usually isn't dramatic when you build it correctly. It's just patient. The next morning, I drove into town, handed everything across the county counter, signed one final authorization, thanked the clerk for her time, and headed home without saying a word to the couple parked across my road. They were sitting outside their RV in folding chairs when I pulled in, smiling the same confident smile I'd seen since day one. The husband raised a soda can toward me like we were old friends. "Can't he tell you to quit whining?" he shouted across the gravel. I smiled back, climbed out of my truck, and answered with the calmest voice I'd used all week. "No. They told me to keep every single video." His smile faded for the very first time, and about 24 hours later, a white county inspection truck rolled slowly toward my gate. Now let me hit pause for a second, because this is the part a lot of people get backwards. Everybody loves watching the confrontation, but almost nobody pays attention to what actually wins these situations. According to standard procedure, counties, HOAs, and property enforcement offices usually care a whole lot less about who shouted the loudest and a whole lot more about who can establish a clean timeline backed by documents. From a legal perspective, blocking a recorded private easement isn't just being a bad neighbor. It can create liability because you're interfering with someone's lawful access, and once you start adding property damage, unauthorized occupation, or environmental issues like leaking fluids, the conversation shifts from neighbor dispute to potential code enforcement. This is a psychological trap. People who believe confidence equals authority often perform for an audience instead of preparing for consequences. They mistake public opinion for legal standing, and every sarcastic comment makes them feel even safer while they're actually digging a deeper hole. The lesson here is, never race to prove you're right when you can quietly prove what happened. A calm camera, organized records, and a little patience usually speak much louder than an angry argument ever could. And by the time that county inspector stepped out of his truck, I already knew the hardest part of the fight was over. The county truck rolled to a slow stop just outside my gate, a little after 9 the next morning. No flashing lights, no dramatic entrance, just one white pickup with the county seal on the door, and a man in a reflective vest carrying a clipboard, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. That's the thing Hollywood never gets right. Real consequences usually arrive quietly. The inspector introduced himself as Daniel Mercer, shook my hand, asked one question, "You the property owner?" I nodded and handed him a folder containing duplicate copies of everything I'd submitted the day before. He smiled slightly. "Good. Makes my job easier." Meanwhile, the husband climbed out of the RV with that same smug confidence he'd been wearing for nearly 2 weeks. "Finally," he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear, "maybe you can explain to this guy he doesn't own the whole road." His wife was already recording again, walking backward to frame the perfect shot, probably expecting another viral neighborhood argument. Instead, Inspector Mercer ignored both of them and started walking the easement inch by inch. He measured the width of the access road. He photographed the survey stake crushed nearly flat beneath the stabilizer jack. He crouched beside the dark stain where hydraulic fluid had seeped into the gravel. He examined the fresh padlock hanging from my chain. Then he compared every detail to the survey map in my file. Nobody spoke for nearly 5 minutes, and the silence made the husband more uncomfortable than any shouting match ever could. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Look, we're only here temporarily. Everybody parks somewhere." Mercer didn't even look up from his clipboard. "Temporary doesn't change ownership." The husband laughed nervously. "Come on, this isn't hurting anybody." That's when Mercer stood, turned toward him, and said the sentence that changed the entire mood. "Sir, are you aware you're occupying a recorded private easement without authorization?" The husband blinked. "It's just a road." "No," Mercer replied calmly. "It's a legally protected access corridor." The wife lowered her phone for the first time since they'd arrived. She sensed the script wasn't going the way she'd imagined. Mercer continued documenting everything, taking measurements, matching the survey coordinates to the county records, then comparing my 11 days of photographs with the current scene. Every single timestamp lined up. Every damage marker appeared exactly where my videos showed it. Every puddle had grown exactly as documented. My evidence wasn't telling a story anymore. It was telling time. The husband grew impatient. "Can we wrap this up? We've got places to be." Mercer finally looked him straight in the eye. "Actually, no, you don't." He flipped another page on his clipboard. "You've obstructed a recorded easement, occupied private property without permission, and allowed vehicle fluids to discharge onto another owner's land. Those are separate violations. The husband tried smiling again, but it came out crooked. You're making this sound worse than it is. Mercer uncapped his pen. I'm not making anything. I'm documenting what's already here. One citation became two. Two became three. Every signature sounded louder than the last as the pen scratched across official county forms. The wife whispered, "Maybe we should just move it now." Mercer shook his head before she finished speaking. "Inspection has already been completed." The husband stepped closer. "We're moving today. Doesn't that fix it?" "No," Mercer answered. "It ends the violation. It doesn't erase the violation." I almost laughed. Not because he was in trouble, but because those 12 words perfectly summarized what I'd been trying to tell him from the beginning. Actions leave footprints long after intentions change. Then another truck appeared at the end of the road. This one much larger. Diesel engine rumbling across the gravel. A heavy-duty towing company. Two operators climbed out wearing grease-stained gloves and reflective jackets. One of them looked over at Mercer. "This the unit?" Mercer nodded once and handed him the signed authorization. There wasn't a dramatic countdown, no heated debate, no last-second courtroom speech. The operators simply went to work. Massive steel arms slid beneath the RV. Thick recovery chains clinked against the frame. Hydraulic jacks lifted several tons of trailer, just enough to free the stabilizers buried in my road. The husband suddenly found his voice again. "You can't do this. That's our home," one operator answered without even looking up. "Then you probably shouldn't have parked your home on somebody else's easement." The wife stopped recording altogether. Her hands were shaking now. As the tow truck eased forward, one stabilizer jack, already bent from sitting on the crushed survey marker, caught against the gravel and snapped with a metallic crack that echoed across the pasture. The broken steel skidded into the ditch while the RV lurched sideways, leaving two deep trenches carved through the access road they'd insisted wasn't hurting anyone. Dust rolled through the morning sunlight. The husband watched helplessly as the home he'd bragged couldn't be moved slowly disappeared behind the tow truck. It wasn't fast. Justice rarely is. It moved at walking speed, steady and unstoppable, exactly the way county procedure intended. When the road finally cleared, Mercer walked back toward me carrying one final item, the silver padlock they'd used to chain my gate shut. He held it up. "Yours?" "No," I said. "Didn't think so." He placed it on top of my fence post. "Keep it until they ask for it." It hung there catching the sunlight, somehow looking much smaller than it had 11 days earlier. The husband stared at it, then at me. "You ruined us over a gate." I shook my head. "No, you gambled everything over believing nobody would check the paperwork." He opened his mouth again, searching for another comeback, but there wasn't one left. The audience he'd tried to impress had disappeared. The camera had stopped recording. All that remained were county forms, towing invoices, environmental cleanup notices, and a road that finally belonged to the people whose names were actually printed on the deed. By the end of the month, every assessed fee had been paid, every citation processed, and every repair to my easement reimbursed. I honestly figured that was the end of the story. I repaired the crushed survey marker, spread fresh gravel across the ruts, rehung my own chain, and settled back into the quiet life I'd bought those 12 acres for. But about a week later, my phone rang. It was the county clerk who processed the tow paperwork. Her voice sounded different this time, less routine, more curious. She said, "Mr. Harper, while reopening your parcel file to finalize the enforcement record, we found something that doesn't make any sense." I asked what she meant. She paused for a second before answering. "There's an old parking authorization attached to your property records, signed years ago, but the signature doesn't belong to any owner we've ever had on file." I frowned. "Whose name is on it?" Another pause. "That's exactly the problem. Whoever signed it never had legal authority to authorize anyone onto your land." Suddenly, the RV wasn't the biggest story anymore. The citations had closed one case, but the county had accidentally opened another, and this one smelled a whole lot more like fraud than bad manners. A couple of weeks after the tow truck disappeared down the road, life settled back into the kind of quiet I'd wanted when I bought those 12 acres in the first place. The fresh gravel covered the ruts. A new survey stake stood exactly where the old one had been crushed. My own padlock clicked shut every evening with a sound that somehow meant more than it ever had before. And every now and then I'd glance over at that old silver lock still hanging from the fence post. I never kept it because I wanted a trophy. I kept it because it reminded me how quickly ordinary people can convince themselves that confidence creates ownership. It doesn't. Paperwork does. Boundaries do. Respect does. Looking back, the RV was never really the problem. The lock wasn't the problem either. Those were just symptoms of something much bigger. The real issue started the moment someone decided that another person's patience looked like weakness. That's a mistake I've seen more times than I can count. Some people believe the calmest person in the argument must be the easiest one to push around. What they don't realize is that calm people often have the longest attention spans. They'll let you keep talking while they quietly collect every receipt, every photograph, every voicemail, every timestamp, and by the time you realize the conversation has shifted, you're no longer debating opinions. You're explaining evidence. According to standard procedure, every property dispute eventually reaches the same crossroads. Either both sides solve the problem through cooperation, or someone with legal authority steps in and relies on facts instead of emotions. That's why I never encourage people to copy the dramatic parts of stories like mine. Don't bait your neighbors. Don't escalate a conflict just because you're angry. Don't assume revenge is justice. Let the records do the heavy lifting. From a legal perspective, the strongest position isn't usually the loudest one. It's the one supported by surveys, deeds, photographs, recorded easements, and a timeline that nobody can honestly dispute. Those documents may seem boring on the day you buy a piece of land. The one afternoon, they can become the difference between winning a disagreement and spending months trying to undo a costly mistake. The county inspector didn't save me because he liked me. The towing company didn't arrive because they felt sorry for me. They acted because the evidence met the standard required for enforcement. That's a lesson worth remembering no matter where you live. This is a psychological trap. When people surround themselves with friends who constantly agree with them, they begin believing popularity is the same thing as permission. The couple parked outside my gate had already convinced themselves I was the neighborhood villain before we ever exchanged names. Every sarcastic joke, every video they recorded, every laugh they shared reinforced that belief until they stopped questioning whether they might actually be wrong. That's how pride works. It creates an echo chamber where every opinion sounds like proof. Then reality shows up with a clipboard, and suddenly, confidence has nowhere left to hide. I don't know what happened to that couple after they paid the fines. Maybe they found another campground. Maybe they learned something. Maybe they still tell people they were treated unfairly. That's their story to carry. Mine is much simpler. I still wake up early. I still drink bad coffee on my porch. I still check my fences after a storm. The difference now is that I appreciate those quiet mornings a little more, because I know how easily peace can disappear when somebody mistakes kindness for surrender. As for that mysterious permit the county clerk uncovered, well, that's a story that still wasn't finished. Somebody's name had been attached to my property years before I ever owned it, and if that signature was fraudulent, then the RV incident may have uncovered something that had been hiding in the records for a very long time. Sometimes the biggest discoveries aren't found because people go looking for them. They're found because somebody finally pays attention to a detail everyone else ignored. The lesson here is, protect your property before you have to defend it. Know your boundaries before someone else tests them. And never underestimate the value of patience backed by documentation. Justice isn't always fast, and it isn't always dramatic. But when facts are stronger than feelings, the truth has a remarkable way of catching up. Now I'm curious what you think. If you walked outside tomorrow morning and found your own gate chained shut by complete strangers, would you have stayed as calm as I did? Or would your patience have run out long before day 11? Let me know down in the comments, because I'd honestly like to hear how you would have handled it. And if you think that mysterious parking permit points to simple carelessness, or something much bigger hiding beneath the surface.